A serial killer hoping to remove his existence seeks a psychologist's help, turning her life upside down. One night in Stockholm, Kristen, a pregnant woman, hears a knock on her door. She checks on who it might be, and a man dressed in surgical attire knocks her unconscious. When she awakens, Kristen finds herself restrained, and the man proceeds to carve out her unborn child. The following night in Copenhagen, well-reputed psychologist Susanne Hartmann finishes her therapy session with a businessman. Before she heads home, she inquires about her schedule for tomorrow with her secretary, Johanna. She informs Susanne about her upcoming lecture and the last client she'll have for that day. The client is Mark Zidenius, and his documents reveal nothing about his condition. Irked, Susanne reminds her she wants to know a brief background about her clients. In Johanna's defense, Mark refuses to provide any information about him. Inside her residence, Susanne lovingly socializes with her husband Frederick and daughter Rebecca. Aside from her successful career, she has a complete family to come home to, further contributing to her picture-perfect life. Later in bed, Susanne watches news coverage about a serial killer who killed a pregnant woman in a closed restaurant in Stockholm. The killer has gruesomely removed the fetus from her womb. Shockingly, there are also similar cases in Copenhagen and Trondheim. Moreover, a message written on the wall was discovered. "I am falling into the endless depths of loneliness. There is no one to catch me." Susanne finds the passage familiar, so she jots it down. Afterward, she rifles through her previous diaries and realizes it's the exact quote from her entries. The next day, Susanne heads to her office after finishing her lecture. As she prepares to meet her client, she interacts with an office worker from the neighboring building. Just in time, Mark arrives and proceeds to pay for the session with Susanne. When the psychologist hears he's paid for the therapy session, she goes to Johanna's desk and welcomes him to her office. In starting the therapy, Susanne uses an hourglass as a timer, making Mark wonder if her clients get stressed with it. Susanne explains she works with clarity, and time is a factor for a psychologist. Moving on, she inquires about the reason for his appointment, and Mark reveals he wants to die. Back then, he tried to end his life but realized it wasn't enough. This confuses Susanne, so Mark clarifies killing oneself is for the weak. He wants to feel like he's never existed. With this in mind, Susanne proceeds to ask about Mark's personal background, which he willingly shares. According to him, he works in construction sites and also takes odd jobs. While at it, Mark confesses he used all of his savings just to book an appointment with her. He believes her expensive appointment fee equates to delivering the best service. However, Susanne enlightens him that she specializes in business psychology, so she doubts she's the right person to help him. Due to this, she recommends that he seek help elsewhere, especially with people who share a similar struggle as him. Mark says she's yet to know his struggles, so Susanne allows him to open up about it. Again, he voices his desire to disappear, baffling her. She asks him if he's tried consulting psychiatry, but he denies it. Straightforwardly, Susanne reiterates she can't help him with his problem. Confused, Mark asks why she can't help him. She emphasizes that she has no experience with people his age. Upon hearing this, Mark brings up her daughter and menacingly looks at Rebecca's photo. He wonders if she has other offspring, but Susanne deems Rebecca her only child. After a short pause, Mark voices his wish that his parents had loved him. Taken aback, she asks about his parents' whereabouts, and he tells her they're already gone. Suddenly, Mark shares a quote similar to what Susanne has heard on the news. She begins to feel threatened, causing her to stall for a bit. Abruptly, Mark requests to use the toilet, so she allows him. While he's away, Susanne notices her name on a ferry ticket to Bergen hidden in Mark's coat. Terrified, she contacts her husband, but the call goes to voicemail. Still, she tries to leave a message, but Mark arrives. To try to escape him, she lies about having to leave early because of an emergency with Rebecca. Mark objects and insists they finish the session, emphasizing he's been patiently waiting for such a moment with her. Susanne confronts him about the ferry ticket, but he simply evades it. Because of this, Susanne threatens to call the authorities, but he declares they'll stay in her office. She tries to call for Johanna's help, but her secretary doesn't respond. Threateningly, Mark tells her Johanna isn't around anymore, alarming her. Susanne quickly leaves her office to find Johanna, but the door leading outside is locked. At that moment, Susanne's phone rings, alerting him she tried to ask someone for help. Susanne senses the dangers of the situation, so she tries to shout for help. Unfortunately, Mark grabs her from behind and gags her. Fueled with adrenaline, Susanne kicks him, allowing her to head to the bathroom. There, she discovers a dying Johanna with a slitted throat. Susanne tries to stop the bleeding, but Mark seizes her. Moments later, Mark proposes a deal with Susanne. He'll free her if she saves him within half an hour. Susanne defeatedly agrees, so Mark removes the piece of cloth from her mouth. She declares she'll not die, and he doesn't deny the possibility. To spook her, Mark reveals that's what his casualties were thinking before they passed away. When she hears this, Susanne realizes that Mark is the serial killer from the news. Mark initiates the beginning of the therapy session and even gives her an extra minute. However, Susanne refuses, angering him. Therefore, he approaches her desk and grabs a book she published about treating a neglected child. He proceeds to read a few excerpts from the book, planning to make Susanne feel guilty for refusing a neglected child like him. Now guilty, Susanne agrees to help Mark and requests he retrieve her notebook for note-taking. Though he's skeptical about it, he eventually complies. Once she receives her notebook, Susanne points out that Mark is dubbed the fetus killer. Mark dislikes the nickname, opining it's primitive. For him, he doesn't feel like taking their lives. Instead, he gives them freedom, saving them from an impossible life. Susanne disapproves of his words, questioning what he knows about their lives. Angered, he chastises her for the audacity she's displayed. Between them, Mark knows he's the only one who has experienced what an impossible life feels like. Not wanting to dwell on the topic, Mark reminds her of what time she has left, so they resume their session. As a start, Susanne orders him to lie down on the couch and close his eyes while he recounts the first time he's killed someone. Mark refuses, thinking she'll use it as an opportunity to escape. Defeated, Susanne urges him to end her life if he only intends to refuse her orders. Eventually, Mark complies as Susanne's boldness surprises him. Once he's settled, Mark listens as the psychologist urges him to return to his childhood memory. According to him, his parents had difficulty in conceiving a child, and even his brother died at an early age. Due to this reason, Mark hated him since his death made his life miserable. Unbeknownst to Mark, Susanne isn't taking notes of his account, but she's writing help instead. Through this, she will alert the office worker to summon the authorities. Back in Mark's recollection, he remembers the time when his parents were intoxicated from the bar. He saw a forklift at the end of the road, igniting his desire to end his unreliable parents' lives. As if fate helped him, his parents sat in the back seat and passed out due to drunkenness. Carefully, he released the handbrake and went out to push the car. Everything went according to his plan as his parents met their demise. On the other hand, Susanne pretends she's listening intently, but she's trying to catch the office worker's attention. Sadly, the man leaves his office because he's received a phone call. Mark continuously shares his past, admitting that his first crime had various flaws. He overheard the authorities had found his fingerprints at the crime scene, yet they never indicted him because, with his age, they believed it would be an impossible trial. His eavesdropping led him to discover he was actually adopted. This made him realize why his adoptive parents treated him poorly. In the present, Mark asks Susanne if she's figured out how to save him, but she simply declares he suffers from his abandonment. Mark remembers the time he was allowed to know about his biological parents' information. When he was a teen, Mark learned that his mother had remarried and changed her surname. Upon learning about her workplace's location, he patiently waited for her. Honestly, he was worried about how she would perceive him, especially since she'd never seen him before. On the same day, he followed her to a bookstore and watched her as she delivered a lecture. Admittedly, he was speechless and wondered what he would say to her. It turns out that his mother is none other than Susanne. Shocked, Susanne's unable to form her thoughts. Mark proceeds to remind her of what happened after their encounter at the bookstore. Back then, he followed Susanne through town, hoping to converse with her. However, she refused to entertain him. Because of his revelation, Susanne is unaware that the office worker is going home for the night. Mark hands her his birth certificate, causing an emotional Susanne to apologize. Following this, Mark proceeds to recount the first time he tried to end his life. He realized that simply dying wasn't enough. Instead, he wanted to experience his death, see his own funeral. One night at a pub, he met Javier, a backpacker from Spain whom he turned as his substitute in executing his death experience. Since Javier had a different set of teeth than him, Mark erased his own biological evidence. This way, the authorities would deem Javier's corpse as Mark's. To execute his plan, Mark placed Javier's body inside the car's trunk alongside his biological records. The car was set to run 200 kilometers per hour until it hit a parked tanker filled with fuel. With a laugh, Mark shares that the car experienced a great explosion that Javier's body was impossible to identify. On the day of his supposed funeral, Mark was disappointed that no one came to bid him farewell, not even Susanne. After the funeral, Mark felt like he was resurrected as the god of the Forsaken. Back in the present, Susanne expresses that she thought Mark's new family was good. She chastises her for blindly entrusting him to them, emphasizing that they treated him terribly. Now, he wonders if she ever thought of him, and Susanne confirms. However, Mark doubts it and even tells her she's lying. He shares that he's acquired the ability to hear if someone's lying due to his adoptive father. In a brief demonstration, Mark shows how his adoptive father would get harsh to him. As a result, he developed such an instinct to prepare for the man's next attack. Susanne profusely apologizes for what has happened to him, but Mark doesn't acknowledge it. Instead, he reminds her of the time they have left. Mark changes the subject by urging Susanne to recount the time she gave him away. When Susanne was a teen, she gave birth to Mark, much to her parents' disappointment. They kicked her out of their house because they didn't favor Mark's existence. Admittedly, Susanne couldn't live without her mother's love. Therefore, she signed the adoption papers. Sadly, her mother never loved her again as Susanne couldn't be the person she wanted. Out of nowhere, Mark stands up and demonstrates a horrible memory of how his adoptive father took advantage of him before. His actions terrify Susanne, hence she thinks of a tactic to escape. She offers to help him, but Mark is skeptical, especially since he deems himself a terrible person. The psychologist disproves it and insists on supporting him if he ever thinks of signing himself up. Later on, Mark approaches her and wonders if she's nursed him before. Susanne confirms, but she emphasizes that it only lasted for a week. Mark wishes he had savored it until it lasted. With his words, Susanne has an idea of how to escape. She offers to nurse Mark and he quickly accepts. While he's distracted, Susanne grabs the hourglass and strikes it on Mark's head. Her tactic subdues him, so she immediately tries to escape. However, Mark recovers and he drags her back into the office. Still, Susanne uses her wits by requesting Siri to contact Frederick. Left without a choice, Mark rushes to retrieve her phone, giving her an opportunity to flee. She enters a printing room and tries to remove the bounds on her wrists. To no avail, she uses the vents to call for help. Unfortunately, the janitor has her earphones on. Susanne notices the fax machine, so she writes help on a piece of paper and tries to send it to Frederick's email. As she's about to send it, Mark breaks into the room and overpowers the psychologist, then administers a sedative for her. Slowly, the sedative begins to take effect, and Mark shows her footage wherein he allegedly abducted Rebecca. Moments later, Susanne awakens and finds herself inside the car's trunk. Upon dropping down, she notices a woman on the other side, so she shouts for help. Since the woman doesn't respond, Susanne follows her, but it turns out Mark is donning her clothes. Immediately, he subdues her. Shortly after, Susanne awakens inside a cabin, but she's chained. She scans the whole area and discovers it's Mark's hideout as it contains evidence of his killings. At that moment, he appears, leading her to inquire about Rebecca's whereabouts. Mark evades her question, so Susanne shouts with all her might, hoping Rebecca will hear her. Realization dawns on her. Mark has planned everything, remembering that he bought a ferry ticket under her name. Perplexed, Susanne asks him why he committed such actions. Mark reveals that her book inspired him to build a grandiose idea of himself. As he leaves through Susanne's book, he expresses that her words feel like they're directed at him. Then, he tears the page where Susanne has signed and burns it. He tells her he has the right to take lives as he has experienced what it's like to die. Susanne pleads with him they can still change their situation, but Mark doesn't acknowledge her. Instead, he opens the door, revealing a view of Rebecca near the cliff. Out of panic, Susanne begs him to let Rebecca go, but Mark proceeds to grab the knife. He drops it into the furnace and goes out with his axe. Now determined to save her daughter, Susanne endures the scorching heat of the furnace just to retrieve the knife. Afterward, Susanne endures the freezing temperature as she follows Mark into the cliff. Using his axe, Mark sees that Susanne is approaching him, but he remains calm. In seconds, Susanne stabs him in the back. Susanne rushes to Rebecca but discovers it's just a dummy. At the brink of death, Mark shows her the bottom of the cliff, referring to it as oblivion. For him, everything that gets washed up by the waters disappears like it never existed. Before jumping, Mark assures Susanne his death is nothing as he believes an unloved child dies many times every day. Days later, Susanne is under the police's custody as she is under investigation. Detective Bjorn interrogates her about the credibility of her claims about Mark. Aside from there being no traces of his existence, Bjorn informs her they only discovered her fingerprints all over the cabin. Moreover, Bjorn shows her a document about a land purchase under her name. Interestingly, it has her signature. Susanne realizes that Mark forged her signature from his birth certificate. She insists Mark has framed her for his crime, but the man doubts it. Once more, he shows Susanne photos of her on the ferry, but she clarifies it was Mark dressed in her likeness. Instead of acknowledging her account, Bjorn presents her with photos of Mark's casualties, making her emotional. Susanne explains she doesn't know any of the women, but her words only sound like an alibi to him. Bjorn asks if she was in Stockholm last week, and she confirms. Grimly, Bjorn tells her they found her DNA at the crime scene, specifically her hair. Also, he hypothesizes that Susanne killed her secretary because she'd become suspicious of her. Frustrated, Susanne clarifies she tried to save Johanna, but Bjorn remains skeptical. Unbeknownst to them, Mark has comprehensively calculated how the events will unfold. Last year, Mark pretended to be a hotel staff member just to gain access to Susanne's room. Inside, he snooped through her diary and took a photo of her quote. After that, he gathered her hair and bodily fluids. Fast forward to the day of their meeting, Mark disabled the CCTV cameras on Susanne's building. Then, at the night he sedated her, he thoroughly removed the traces of his presence in her office. Upon arriving at the cabin, Mark imprints Susanne's hands while she's unconscious on the bottles of fetuses. With all the evidence deeming Susanne the culprit, the authorities arrest her. On the day of her trial, Susanne faces the jurors, ready to defend herself.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.